world per capita. And that rather than spending so much money on roads and all the construction, we ought to have at least put $100 billion more into that and subtract it from capital expenditure. That is what we should have done. A couple of years ago, Mr. Speaker, I was in this Parliament indicating that there is massive mismanagement of funds when capital works are given big spaces. And you know, I quoted then from an extremely important economist who had done studies in these matters. And these matters were dealt with in a book called The Bottom Billion. The important thing here, sir, is what he said at page 138. And I'll quote it. It has the word corruption, but it is a quote from a textbook.
Honorable member, we have a rule about reputation.
Yes. What reputation? 10 years ago, sir?
Not only 10 years ago, I think I've heard this over my past decade and a half from your own mouth, and we can get the record. But please expunge that part. You can say beep.
All right. By contrast, the mismanagement of funds in the construction sector has been a dirty secret. Transparency International decided to bring it out to greater prominence by devoting its global report of 2005 in the sector. Funds, I use that alternative. Each project is a one-time only thing, and so cannot readily be priced. There are so many uncertainties in execution that it is not possible to draw up what economists refer to as a complete contract. As a result, it is easy to evade the discipline that would otherwise be imposed by competitive tendering. A crooked construction company colludes with a public official to win the contract with artificially low bid, then recontract on points of detail that crop up during construction. Credible studies for some countries that estimates of how mismanagement of the funds in the construction sector is raising the cost of infrastructure and thereby reducing growth. And these effects are large. Of course, he goes on to say that this is an attribute generally of what you call natural resource economies, just like Guyana in view of the oil. Mr. Speaker, what we have in this budget is a spending of $662 billion in infrastructure of all varieties. And what we have as wages and salaries and pensions is $121 billion. Mr. Speaker, when we go back to the practical realities of what it is that the construction contractors will make, it is generally in the vicinity of about 20% profit for each contract. 20% of profits for each contract will make $133 billion, which will then go to some companies and some private contractors, and that is about 1,000 of them, Mr. Speaker. It is roughly 1,000 of them that win the contracts over the years in the PPP government, and so you have $133 billion going towards this 1,000. What we have as emoluments for the public servants, which includes police and soldier and public servants administration and all of that, is about 54,000. 54,000. What do you have as pensioners? You have about 40,000. Well, I see inside of this budget speech, Mr. Ashley Singh indicating, honorable member, that it is 72,000. 76,000. Now, if you add 76,000 to 54,000 public servants, and they're getting $121 billion as against 133 billion for about 1,000. We are going to create a caste system in this country. That's not on parliamentary, sir. Caste system, whereby the inequality is going to be so vast to the extent whereby they are literally going to control this economy. Every single one of them would go and purchase friendships literally with members of the government as, again, the bottom billion states. It is an important aspect of the matter to appreciate, because how could you spend so much on infrastructure knowing that you have the Lilautis, Gurdials, all those things? By the way, in the Stabrook News, that was the 52nd edition of the cost of living interviews. So many people have been stating, but we do have some of them in the government now stating that, look, a lot of people have been praising the budget. A lot of people have been praising the budget. Well, let's be balanced. How many people have been indicating that this thing is hard and life is so difficult all across the country? It is indeed a toxic combination too that we have when you're going to have a set of oligarchs in this country. A set of oligarchs in combination with a set of control freaks, because everything they want to control. They want to control the press, they want to control what people think, and a whole lot of things. That is why at this budget, that combination is going to be disastrous for this country. It will be called the control oligarchs. It is a sickening situation, and we are not seeing that poverty is being confronted. As I have said on other occasions, necessitous, and quoting from, I think it was President Roosevelt, necessitous men are not free men. People who can't afford 2 square meals in Guyana are not going to be free. And all flourishing is mutual, because poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. It is fundamental then that we do not make a portion of our country one that is embarrassed, because poverty and being poor induces a lot of shame. It induces embarrassment. It's a diminishment of life. It is a feeling that your government is against you, as some have told us. I have gone to the estate areas, and they have indicated that although we voted for this government, oh my gee, they said the government seems to be against us, and the constant fear, Mr. Speaker, and the constant fear that it will get worse. That is what people think. It will create this caste system, as I said, and a second-class citizens. Mr. Speaker, we must advocate the building of consensus. Lots of PPP people have been calling on me and pleading that let us have more consensus. We have a paradigm shift now that necessitates what is called a shared prosperity. But I don't know if we're going to have that, because as a matter of fact, we feel that these people, oligarchs is the word, they do not want to be persuaded by any argument that comes from the other side. We need, in relation to this matter, sir, a leadership which cultivates an ethic of genuine care, compassion, and concern for every human being. Mr. Speaker, I want to say we did lots more in relation to what they're now doing with this big set of money. And that was brilliantly exposited by Ms. Director Finance, and of course the speakers yesterday as to what we are doing and what we did in that 5-year period. Less money, and we did lots more. We did lots more for public servants. We did lots more for the working poor. And when we built the roads with a small amount of money, run to them and say, are we going to eat road? And you got $202 billion now for the roads. And Parliamentary stating that we can't get more than 1 meal a day. What is that? It is atrocity and a monstrosity. Mr. Speaker, I want to indicate that also amongst this 1,000 or so, we see that the government is being extraordinarily friendly with them. They are tax dodgers to a large extent, this class. And as stated in Mr. Christopher Ram's focus and analysis, he has indicated that a lot of these self-employed and contractor class do not, with all the big monies they make, pay their taxes to the extent of what is supposed to be the right taxes. What we had done in 2015 to 2020 was to create a withholding tax so that at least we could have some amount of money from the big profits they make. Everybody, taxes and payments of taxes is the first duty of citizenship, in my opinion. It is. Of course I do. And it's, Mr. Speaker, the withholding.
Remember, Mr. McCoy, please. I've been cautioning people about parliamentary language, and I heard you quite distinctly just now. Please, control yourself.
Yes, please. This withholding tax is an important aspect to ensure that at least some income comes into the budget, or at least the consolidated fund, for the purposes of ensuring that they pay their due amount. But it was repealed soon as this government came in. It was repealed. And this is why I say, as I have said some 10 years ago, that this government is extremely close with that class of people, the crony capitalist contractor class, to the detriment of the working class. And it is an amazing thing, Mr. Speaker, that these are the people who use, and they still got it in the constitution in the party, that they are the vanguard of the working class. You can state that, but at the concrete level, you are but a cement and sand government. At the concrete level, you are a sand and cement government. And that is what it is. You are not working class at all. And so you could go and take that. Mr. Speaker, there must be a balanced approach that should have gone into the distribution of the spendings here. We haven't seen that. This rebalancing is necessary because sometimes you can overheat an economy by spending so much money on infrastructure when you do not have the capacity and the capabilities. It was mentioned yesterday what you have to do in relation to stalled projects. And some of the projects being stalled, there is absolutely no disciplining of those contractors, even giving more addition and fuel that indeed there is a bias for that class. You have to start taking away the contracts, Mr. Edgell. You have to start ensuring that they don't do this indisciplined thing. But we are going to have nothing of the sort. You know why? Because you go back to the bottom billion. Why countries are poor? How countries fall apart? It is because of this elite nexus with them, so that their treasury chest is going to be filled for, let's say, a 2025 elections. Mr. Speaker, it is annoying as to what is transpiring with the kind of money. We had wanted the oil monies to be harnessed in such a way that everybody will share in the pie. But no, we have an exclusive set of people dealing with it. It is not going to help this country. And as I have said somewhere else, it is going to create what is called disenchantment and resentment at the bottom there. When people see that some sets are getting, and especially if the majority of that set comes from a certain demographic, it is going to create problems to this country. The cohesion that we want, the one Guyana that we want, will not come when you pour $668 billion towards them with a 20% arrangement, and then, of course, even other things flowing from that, as against 121 billion. So I want to say my fundamental critique here is that indeed there was not a proper priority set so that everybody can distribute the shared prosperity that we wanted out of a budget. And that is why we signed the agreement, an agreement which they chastised, as you know, Mr. Speaker, that it was rotten agreement. We're going to renegotiate it as soon as we come into power. They can't renegotiate now. Sanctity of contract is their mantra, as it were. Mr. Speaker, it is going to be an extraordinarily difficult year, in my opinion, based on this budget, for the simple reason that you are going to get the cost of living going further up. As was mentioned, and I do not want to go over the statistics, although I had gotten some of the statistics too, in the local industries of fishing and agriculture and gold production and everything else, as was stated so brilliantly by Director of Finance yesterday and articulately, every one of those were doing better in the APNU AFC time as against what we have now. And when you rebase it, and you rebase the base amount, and you could talk about 28% increase, but what was mentioned by Director, the amount of earnings that we were bringing in from fisheries and forestry and all of those, the statistics are there, was far superior. That is going to cause a tremendous amount, what you call the resource cost, as it were, because indeed our local industries are now diminishing. And that diminishment will see cost of even items that we produce in Guyana going upwards. Even the Baji and the Bora and the Baigan, we are going to have all those prices going up. And then, of course, I suppose then they're going to run to that $7 billion relief package. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? Distribute to their friends and families. It is happening now as I speak. They have this arrangement whereby PPP activists are distributing monies and they're bypassing coalition supporters. I have seen and heard, of arrangements whereby some of the PPP supporters are begging the activists, please ensure that you give that man something, not because he's a known opposition person. And they get the money, they have a sack, and they're distributing. Is that how you run country? Why is it that you do not have an accountable system that states who is doing the distribution and also who collected, say like the entrepreneurial 250, young entrepreneurs or small businesses, $250,000. We have been asking all the time, look, it is not a burden that is shifted to us in the opposition. It is a burden that is on you to prove who and who you give the money to. But you don't want to give us, since the COVID relief we ask, the flood relief we ask, the fishermen's relief we ask. You never provided it. And then you said, show me the proof, show me the evidence. That is not how you operate a country accountably. And you must understand too, Mr. Speaker, that these persons don't understand that democracy got certain pillars. They emphasize an important pillar, and I agree with them, free and fair elections. But it has good governance, it has rule of law, and it has accountability as the three other equal important pillars. We are not getting the accountability one here at all, apart from the rule of law that was mentioned by our shadow AG, Roysdale Ford, yesterday. And so it is important that we get these figures. I have been asking, take for example, what was it that was given to some members after the flood relief, and was told by the agriculture minister, we don't have any information to give. How could you do that? And the fishermen's also relief. Mr. Speaker, it is important to understand that if we want to get there into the promised land, now that we have gotten the money that could take us there, we need to have accountability and transparency. Right. We need to have the rule of law and not only jump on this thing about elections, because ultimately you want it, you're there, you're in government. But the institutions, for now, accountability, how monies are spent and all of that, we don't know. And take, for example, before I go on to public security, just before the ink was drying on the budget presentation, we heard that we're going to get some helicopters and all of that. I went into the budget and look at capital expenditures and then the volume 3, and I'm looking for where we're going to get the helicopters monies from. There is nothing. They are not being, they're very stealthy. They're secretive. They're not indicating that the furniture equipment, well, we could understand that one, helicopters and air aviation equipment or whatever. And so I don't know, but I'll be asking the questions. But the vice president has indicated that yes, we are dealing with a firm, Bell and all of that, to the extent of 4 helicopters. Mr. Speaker, that is not good enough. And we must not, I will wish to make a concluding remark on this, we must not borrow so much. Mr. Indar, honorable member, indicated that we wanted tax. But does he understand that when you borrow in the 4-year, 1.3 billion US dollars, that is a tax on our future generations? And it is worse because we don't know if the oil prices are going to stabilize with all the volatilities in the world and the vulnerabilities. Yet you come here and you cuss us down for some minor taxes and increases that we had. And we have been asking you to provide us with the 200 names and you can't. But you got from 2020 to 2024 now, $1.3 billion in borrowings to what? As Asghar Ali would say, to bill away the money. Mr. Speaker, we must get all the facts from the various remarks and legends on this budget as to where it is that the money is going, so that we could keep scrutiny. A good opposition can only scrutinize also when there's information that ought to be provided. And you, Mr. Speaker, and myself go back a long time. You yourself used to make that remark when you were an opposition parliamentarian. Mr. Speaker, I come now to the public security sector. And I've got to begin by stating that it would appear that my colleague, Mr. Ben, have been coming up with some otherwise outrageous policy statements. One of which is, all you out there that got illegal guns, take them and throw them at the police station and bring them in. That is top class security policy. And it is in that context that I wish to say that this aspect of security, of ensuring that there is quality analysis as to what a policy should be, must come from this government, because there is no shortage of funds now to get the expertise necessary if you are not an expert. And it was inexpert of the minister to say what he said. But I think he intended it to make laughter more than anything. But you mustn't play like that with the security sector. In view of what we did in the APNU AFC coalition, of ensuring that there was an amnesty in which you know who and who have all the firearms, and then they bring it in, that's the necessary way of doing it. We see today, even the minister admitting, I think I'll write it down here, road deaths, 76% increase, fires increased by 182%, and this is only of last year, and a number of other things, road deaths, murders, and all of that. I am glad that the minister is indicating that indeed these statistics have been at least given to him by the police force, and he is bringing it to our attention. But in this sphere of activity, it is vitally necessary that we continue what the APNU AFC had done. Mr. Speaker, we had two major projects. One was the British Security Sector Report, and the other, the Citizens Security Strengthening Report. These are important reports which made a set of recommendations, and in the set of recommendations, you have to now implement. We had indicated to them that we want the monies from the British Security Sector Reform, but we also want the brains behind it. And the brains behind it was a man called Mr. Russell Coombe. And he knew the network of experts that you could go and talk about how to enhance your maritime capabilities, how to enhance the police strategic unit, how to improve the human resource within the police force, and all of that. And all of these reports came out in and around a period of study, and they came out around, I think, 2019. And these reports are important for the development. We must not, because there's a change in government, surrender those reports or shelve them. We must continue. I am not seeing that happen. I even created a change board to ensure that that happens.
Honorable member, before you go to that board, you need an extension.
This is very quick, ma'am.
Actually, you got 2 minutes more.
Thanks very much for that, Vincent. Could I have 2 minutes more in the 5?
Comrade Speaker, I do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, Opposition Chief Whip. Honorable member, you may continue to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for that extension. I want to say in this 5 minutes that I have that there were accountability in the public security sector under APNU AFC. Yesterday, Mr. Jones, honorable member, stated how we have a public security committee of the Parliament that was created under the robust constitutional reform process. All members of that committee during the course of the APNU coalition government, we were in every way dealing with all the questions that they want answered. And Mr. Gale, and I think the honorable member himself, Mr. Ben, were members of that committee. And they were asking me for after we convened the first meeting, we would like to hear what the commissioner has to say as his projections. We would like to see Mr. Gentle, what he had to say. Brian Gentle, I think his name is, Fire Chief, and Samuels as the head of the prison. And they cross-examined these people for hours in that committee. You know, since we got the committee, as you said yesterday, Mr. Jones, not one meeting for 2020, 21, 22, 23. 4 years, not a meeting. And on the last occasion, I asked Mr. Ben, why you don't convene the meeting so that we can ask questions of everything. and scrutinize everything right up to firearms license and everything. No, they do not want that. But Ramjatan, as public security member, opened it up so you can ask all the questions from any department, because under the Constitution, the power of this Public Security Committee of Parliament is to ensure all administration matters and policy
slogan, keeping the course, etc., etc. Mr. Speaker, sometimes when you come to Parliament, you have to use your skills as a teacher or whatever you are for to teach some people. And I would like to let the Honorable Minister Ben know that the Honorable Ramjatan merely said that contractors made 20% profit. Now, what does that mean? It means that you take out all the expenses and what is left is the profit. Where are you going, Honorable Ben? I wish to lecture to you a little bit. Mr. Speaker, indeed, the People's Progressive Party is keeping the course according to their slogan for this budget. And that course is by bypassing the majority of Guyanese in this and previous budgets, whose incomes relegate them to scraping survival on a daily basis. The policy, the policy of fattening the rich and hoping that the fat will trickle down has certainly become an abject failure and has widened the gap between the few who have and the majority who do not have. Mr. Speaker, before I delve further into the 2024 budget, please allow me to express on behalf of the peoples of the hinterland, who, by and large, are on the front line of our borders, sincere thanks to the leaders of our country and the people of Guyana for standing in unity in saying to Venezuela and the world that Essequibo is ours. I remember the words of Mr. Aubrey Norton, leader of the opposition, when he said that we have to first have a country, to first ensure that our sovereignty and territorial integrity are intact before we can struggle for political power. Mr. Speaker, the world heard our unified voice. However, as for modus operandi of the People's Progressive Party's government, who kept saying that we are unified against Venezuela, but by their actions, deliberately continue to sideline the opposition. Since this event, there have been only a few sittings of the Foreign Relations Committee. Further, the leader of the opposition was also not included in the negotiations leading to the Argyle meeting. Mr. Speaker, quite recently, President Nicolas Maduro stated that he has a plan to get control of Essequibo. Mr. Speaker, the threat is far from over. And let me go back to my teaching skills again. I never said that he was invited. Put on your ears and listen. I did not say that. I said that we were not involved in any sort of discussions or meetings before that happened. That is what I said. Mr. Speaker, I want to repeat. Quite recently, President Nicolas Maduro stated that he has a plan to get control of Essequibo. Mr. Speaker, the threat is far from over. We, the indigenous peoples of Guyana, demand that any threat against our sovereignty and territorial integrity be met by a unified stance by our leaders. We request that the Foreign Relations Committee meet on a monthly statutory date to be decided on, and most importantly, be inclusive of the opposition's representatives and experts. You don't have all the experts. We have a lot. Involve them. This is Guyana. This is not PPP. This is Guyana. We also take note that monies allocated in our budget for the defense of our sovereignty and territorial integrity at a glance seems very inadequate. We request that the Guyana Defense Forces active and reserve components be prepared for any eventualities. We request that the community policing groups be given adequate training and support. We were told that community policing members are working without being paid monthly stipends or salaries. This must be corrected. Mr. Speaker, among others, we request that the National Service and the People's Militia be reactivated. Mr. Speaker, with the current oil boom, we request that our servicemen and women and their families be well catered for socio-economically by the state. You can't get them or us at the border defending the whole nation and not be treated properly. They are in the front line. How many of us would want to join the People's Militia? How many of us would want to join the army? I was in the People's Militia. I was a cadet corps officer at school. I was also in the Guyana National Service. How many of you could say the same thing? How many of you could say the same thing? Mr. Speaker, one of the hallmarks of great leaders is their strength, courage, and resilience in times of crises and threats. If we were to take a roll call on the 3rd of December, 2023, when Venezuela held its referendum, we would have seen those who used various excuses to flee Guyana. What is more important than standing with your people who are facing an existential threat? I know that the rule prevents us from calling names, but we know the men, you know the men, all of you know the men. I see Mr. McCoy, Honorable Carmen McCoy, has left because they left him back. They didn't take him away. That is how they will treat you in times of crisis, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Speaker, we listened to the Honorable Dr. Ashley Singh. But before I come to that, let me mention that the last time, I think it was early November, we had an extraordinary meeting of our Parliament to come as a united front against whatever threats are there. I want the nation to know. I want the Indigenous people of Guyana to know that after I spoke at that meeting, I guess, and it was because I spoke the truth about a certain de facto leader of Guyana, I was accosted afterwards and threatened by the Honorable Kwame McCoy. I want him to know, and the world to know, all of us have to die, but some die before others. When you threaten an Indigenous person, especially a representative in Parliament, you are threatening the Indigenous peoples of Guyana. I will leave it there for now. Mr. Speaker, we listened to the Honorable Dr. Ashley Singh, who is still to be recognized as being capable enough to warrant or be given an independent ministry with an independent title of Senior Minister of Finance, and leaving out all the whatever, spending considerable time attacking his perceived critics by lifting up his petticoat periodically during his presentation of the budget and treating Guyanese to what is commonly known as a session of abusing. Maybe he was trying to outdo the legendary Satira Gal. One wonders if the Honorable Ashley Singh saw that even his colleagues were bored and really were not excited by this budget presentation. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Ashley Singh, who allows himself to be lectured by a de facto president of Guyana, even went further to debase this Honorable House when by referring to another MP by a call name. And he was on his feet. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Ashley Singh was not cautioned by the Speaker, so I take it that it is now acceptable to use call names in this Honorable House and in different ways. In Wapishana language, there is a name called Chibub. Chibub. This is a fitting description of the Honorable Ashley Singh. It is not debasing nor disrespectful. It is my hope that those who cannot take their nostril out of the gutter do make an effort to do so. Mr. Speaker, we heard the Honorable Ashley Singh parroting the fiction that the APNU AFC fired some 2,000 CSOs in 2015 on their ascension to government. I did not start that call name. He who started it will have to say he started it and ask for forgiveness. Mr. Speaker, I have also heard the PPP at various forums and occasions. Let me repeat this. Mr. Speaker, we heard the Honorable Ashley Singh parroting the fiction that the APNU AFC fired some 2,000 CSOs in 2015 on their ascension to the government. Mr. Speaker, I have also heard the PPP at various forums and occasions repeating this untruth with impunity. Mr. Speaker, I wish to once again correct this fallacy. In 2015, on the APNU AFC's ascension to government, it found a cancelled check that was prepared and processed to pay some 2,000 CSOs at that time. I repeat that the check was cancelled. On inquiry, it was found that it was the People's Progressive Party's cabinet that issued the instruction for the then permanent secretary acting to cancel the check or to fire the CSOs. Mr. Speaker, the cabinet secretary who issued the directive to cancel the check is none other than the Honorable Gail Teixeira, who is here with us today. It was the People's Progressive Party that fired the 2,000 indigenous CSOs.
Mr. Speaker,
The Honorable Minister is on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, under the Standing Orders 41, I never signed any such instruction, nor gave any such instruction in writing or verbally. And I wish that to be retracted from the honorable member's presentation.
Thank you, Minister. Honorable Member, unless you could produce that document, you'll have to withdraw it. And if you produce that document, I'll be able to reinstate your words.
Mr. Speaker, at this moment here, I cannot do that, so I will withdraw it. Mr. Speaker, what kind of person would... let me not continue with that. Mr. Speaker, we also listened to the Honorable Ashley Singh, who said that the sum of $2.7 billion from the sale of carbon credits will be granted to indigenous peoples in this 2024 budget. It must be noted that in 2023's budget, the indigenous people received some $4.7 billion from the sale of carbon credits. Mr. Speaker, using an actual example, in a certain indigenous community with 180 families in 2023, each family received for a project an average of Guyana 180,000 or a bit more for a sustainable project. It means that under this 2024 budget, the families in this village would be entitled to a much smaller amount. Mr. Speaker, for the indigenous peoples to access this pittance from the sale of their carbon credits, they had to jump through a lot of loops and over a lot of hurdles, which condescendingly being told how to spend the monies. This is in contrast to the distribution of grants from the national coffers by the PEP activists, who wearing red shorts, to friends and families and supporters giving grants, and all done without acceptable financial accountability. So the indigenous people have to have accountability, nothing wrong, but it was happening to everybody. When you're sharing grants, let's have accountability. Not one family who's supposed to get 200,000 gets 200,000. Not when somebody looks at it, a young Amerindian child in a village and say, oh, you're looking nice, you're giving her 200,000. All sorts of things happen. So let us have some financial accountability. Mr. Speaker, now the monies from the sale of the indigenous people's carbon credits are under the Amerindian Development Fund, or ADF. Mr. Speaker, according to the Auditor General's report in 2014, some $1.2 billion were paid into the ADF by the Ministry of Natural Resources, in keeping with Section 51.3 of the Amerindian Act of 2006, which states that the Geology and Mines Commission shall transfer 25% of royalties from mining activities to a fund designated by the Minister for the benefit of Amerindian communities. To date, Mr. Speaker, this amount cannot be accounted for. And guess who was the minister that presided over this calamity? Mr. Speaker, we do appreciate that our carbon credits were sold, but we do not appreciate that the Minister of Amerindian Affairs, and by extension the government of Guyana, has complete control over the concept and the process of implementation. Mr. Speaker, just imagine that I go to someone's farm and reap and sell his watermelons without free prior informed consent. Then I give him 15% of the total sales. Further, I insist that he spends the money in a certain way. What kind of phrase would the average Guyanese use to describe this ice pass? I cannot see it in Parliament, but there is a phrase. And further, Mr. Speaker, there are reports of some staff of the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs abusing their position of trust. One village, and being informed of the carbon credit monies being available, decided on the formula for each household to get an amount for a sustainable project. On arrival at the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, the Tusha was ordered to disregard his people's wishes and to purchase a second-hand bus. To make this story short, the village rejected the bus and returned it to the supplier. And a community development officer in another area purchased second-hand vehicles for several communities. These vehicles were found to be in poor condition and of poor quality. The CDO now sports a well-reconditioned vehicle for his personal use. Wow. Mr. Speaker, the above examples are just a minuscule amount of the actual situation that currently exists. But it is difficult to remedy the situation because good governance, fair play, and justice are super deficient in the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, and by extension, the government of Guyana. Indigenous villages, Tushas, and persons are routinely discriminated against if they are perceived to be non-supporters of the PPP. Any fictitious or contrived complaint against a perceived non-supporter of the PPP gets the full powers of the Amerindian Act and the laws thrown at them. On the contrary, there are many cases in which persons aligned to the PPP and are accused of serious illegalities are allowed to walk free and to continue to flout the laws with impunity. Well, we'll call that name later. Mr. Speaker, further we note the People's Progressive Party is visibly seeking to control or stymie the activities of our constitutional bodies, such as the Indigenous Peoples Commission. Currently, the PEP is attempting to place a Tusha who is accused of misappropriation of village assets by his villagers to become a member of the Indigenous Peoples Commission. Further, Mr. Speaker, the PPP and its Ministry of Amerindian Affairs have tried their utmost to derail the Amerindian Peoples Association because of this organization's advocacy for the rights of the indigenous peoples. The Ministry of Amerindian Affairs attempts to derail the Upper Mazaruni District Council, and that is another blatant attempt to prevent the indigenous peoples of Guyana from organizing themselves, and as encouraged and recognized by the United Nations. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted that it was the APNU-AFC coalition that broke barriers by supporting the South Rupununi to form the South Rupununi District Council. Today, this organization is recognized and is an example of good governance and positive representation for its peoples. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Ashley Singh mentioned that accumulatively the Indigenous people will get $9 billion out of the $1 trillion budget. Mr. Speaker, this amount can best be described as condescending and in comparison to what is doled out to the failing sugar industry. Mr. Speaker, action speaks louder than words. One cannot help but notice that the failing sugar industry continues to enjoy massive financial inputs. In this year's budget, Guy Super receives a whopping $6 billion. Mr. Speaker, to add to this story, we are hearing in Region 9 that periodically agricultural products are trucked in large quantities from Brazil to be repacked as being produced in Guyana. Is sugar being trucked from Brazil to beef up Gaisuco's statistics? The story goes further. The large trucks are given special considerations while in transit from Latam to the coast of Guyana. The only component missing is a set of outriders with sirens. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the building of the secondary school and its facilities in Karasabay. It must be noted that it was under APNU AFC that steps were put in place to start and support secondary school classes in Karasabay. Secondary school classes also began in Murnau and Napi and elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, while considering the budgetary allocations for secondary education last year, I raised the issue of providing a hot meal for all secondary school students in the hinterland. The then Minister of Local Government and Regional Government stated in his answer that all secondary school students will be entitled to a hot meal whenever they attend school. Mr. Speaker, I was going to say today this has not come to fruition, but this morning somebody from Region 9 texted me to say that yesterday the secondary school received a little bit of food in school. So at least you're listening to us, and let's continue to listen so we can be able to make things better for our Indigenous children and the children of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, only the students who reside in the dormitories are benefiting from 3 meals a day, plus a so-called snack of a banana without juice. Mr. Speaker, as an example that applies to St. Ignatius and Annex secondary schools in Region 9, the students attend the secondary schools miles away. They leave from early morning and return back home late. If the student has no money, then he has to starve. Mr. Speaker, in this Irish country, this is totally unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, we heard a senior PPP's official boasting that some $10 billion will be spent on hinterland roads. However, years come and go, and we know that the roads built by the PPP are mainly of biscuit texture. One example of this is the Latam to South Rupununi roads. At this moment, the road is being renovated at an extremely high cost. Drivers and commuters will enjoy the biscuit roads until the rains arrive, and it is back to roads that will make a moderately sick person become very sick before he or she can get to the hospital. Mr. Speaker, during the consideration of budgetary appropriations last year, I suggested to the government that hinterland roads should include innovations that exist and would allow for better hinterland roads to be built. However, this suggestion seems to have fallen on the deaf ears of the PPP. One can only surmise that it is better for the PPP to have biscuit roads built so that they can continue to dole out large contracts with their attendant kickbacks to their friends, families, and favorites. Mr. Speaker, then there is the fallacy propagated by the PPP that it is the creation of the concept of transformational projects. In most cases, the really transformational projects were being done were conceptualized and preparatory works done by the APNU AFC. The Linden to Latham Road is an example of a transformational project that was conceptualized and preparatory work done by the APNU AFC. It must be noted that had there not been a no-confidence motion orchestrated by the PPP, the first phase from Linden to Marlborough would have already been a reality. It must be further noted that the PPP made efforts to prevent this project from becoming a reality. But luckily, the funders applied pressure and forced them to utilize the funding that was negotiated by the APNU AFC for this project. Further, we are now hearing that the most vital bridge connection between Kurupukari and Fairview has been shelved. Here again, we see the reluctance of the PPP to serve the people by completing wholesome transformational projects, or their inability to see further than their nostrils. Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about bridges. Is it true that there is a newly constructed bridge on the Linden to Latham Road that is built on a hill? One wonders if the PPP is trying to defy the forces of gravity. And Mr. Speaker, what about the Pirara Bridge? This bridge is vital for Latham, South Rupununi, and Brazil to connect by road to the North Rupununi and the coast of Guyana. Work is at a standstill, and if not completed before the rains, that will be here shortly. There will be untold suffering experienced by all. This is the case of more for friends, family, and favorites at the expense and suffering of the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, then there is the road and bridge connection between Latham and St. Ignatius Village in Region 9. The PPP did some basic repairs of this bridge and sides of the road, and then proudly announced that it had done a transformational project. Mr. Speaker, this bridge and road link is a crucial project because periodically the floods inundate this vital link that connects the South Rupununi to Latham. Secondary school children also travel to and from school on this link. There are reports of boats capsizing and near drowning experiences by students. A truly transformational project would be to build a bridge and a road connection, or to be high enough to allow commuters to travel this connection all year round, even when there is a high flood. Mr. Speaker, now we have a major problem of most Guyanese finding it difficult to live good lives because of the high cost of living being experienced. The few friends, families, and favorites of the PPP have no idea of the daily suffering experienced by many to make ends meet. During the days when APNU AFC was in government, the average family of four spent an acceptable portion of their income on food and essentials. Today, under this PPP, the majority of Guyanese are finding it hard to get 3 decent meals daily. Mr. Speaker, according to Kaiju News, dated January 20th, 2023, 43% of Guyanese cannot afford a healthy diet, and around 5% of our population are malnourished. This is according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization's report. Mr. Speaker, with all of the above, the PPP's 2024 budget insults our pensioners with $100 increase per day. Just what can $100 per day do to improve the lives of our senior population? The budget allocates 108 Guyana dollars per day, or 40,000 per year, as a Because We Care cash grant to school children for 1 year. What is $108 per day? That is because they do not care. They do not care. The two showers of Guyana get an amount of 80 Guyana dollars a day as their stipend, whilst working 24 hours a day. What a disgrace. I hope I can say the word disgrace. What a disgrace that our indigenous peoples or leaders, indigenous leaders, are being treated in this way. Our public servants receive a measly 6.5 increase in their income, while the Gas to Show project, that is a brainchild of someone who has a penchant for advocacy for failed projects, gets a huge slice of the pie. Kaisuku continues to suck our economy like a leech. We can only say that this budget is indeed staying the course, and that course is a big curse for Guyana. Mr. Speaker, budget after budget, we see money is being allocated for land titling and revision of the Amerindian Act. When will it be done? To cut a long story short, when will it be done? I guess it will be us as the next government who will have to do that. Mr. Speaker, but the Honorable Minister forgot to mention, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Ashley Singh mentioned that some villages were given titles by this government, the PPP. But Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Minister forgot to mention that some of those villages that he mentioned were previously granted titles by APNO AFC. One example was Yupukari's extension that APNU AFC granted previously, among others. And I could call the Tushaw, if I get a chance now, to call the Tushaw of Yupukari to come here and tell you that that is what happened, although you are saying no. Mr. Speaker, indeed, staying the course is ongoing for the PPP. However, the course is one to weaken the rights of the indigenous peoples. Mr. Speaker, the People's Progressive Party used its position as the government of Guyana to take over aspects of the control of Marudi mines from the indigenous people and small miners of the South Rupununi. Today, there is a People's Progressive Party group controlling the riches being gained from the area that was allocated by GGMC. This is staying the course to make the PPP's friends, families, and favorites hog the patrimony of Guyana.
Honorable member, to stay the course, you're going to have to get 5 minutes to conclude.
Thank you. Comrade Speaker, I do move that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, honorable member. You have 5 minutes to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, the indigenous village of Chinese Landing has been struggling for many years to regain control of Tasavini, a mineral-rich area of their title land that was being mined by a certain miner without their consent. Mr. Speaker, the Chinese Landing village appealed to the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, and the commission agreed that there were some issues and some of the rights, many of the rights of the indigenous peoples were being affected. So, an order that corrective actions be taken. The PPP government has since ordered a cease order on all mining activities in the whole of Chinese Landing, although the village had only requested that cease order for mining operations be done in Tasavini. It must be noted that the indigenous peoples are allowed by law to do artisanal mining on their title lands. The move by the PPP's government to stop mining in the entire Chinese Landing is seen as a move to punish the Carib people of Chinese Landing for standing up for their rights. Also, the PPP government is now asking the ISCHR to withdraw precautionary measures granted for regards to Chinese Landing. This government here has no regard for the indigenous people. You allow them, you make sure that they cannot get monies to survive on their own, from their own lands. And now you are pointing to allow or ask the ISCHR to step away from their defense. They must be left alone to take the bashing that you want to give them. Mr. Speaker, and to continue the rights of indigenous people, I wish to bring to the nation and all that the Petroleum Activities Bill recently passed by the PPP's slim majority in Parliament gives the Minister of Natural Resources, and by extension the PPP, supreme powers to identify areas of petroleum exploration, negotiate and allow such exploration and production in any part of Guyana. This act disregards any free prior informed consent by the affected communities. This act strikes against the fundamental rights of the indigenous peoples. On behalf of the indigenous peoples of Guyana, I ask that this act be repealed. Mr. Speaker, although monies have been allocated for the rich, okay, we're done with that. Mr. Speaker, there are some issues that are affecting indigenous people, and I will try to go through them in this short period of time. One, American Hostel in Georgetown. Patients have to find their own transport to go to the hospital. Just imagine, patients have to find their own transport to go to the hospital at our American Hostel in Georgetown, and the minister is just a stone throw away. Meals are often in short supply. Our rich country, and this is how we're treating our indigenous people. There is a need for a residential doctor to be on site. And in Region 9, there continues to be a shortage of cassava in the Rupununi. Cassava is the main staple of the Rupununi. And there were some interventions by the government, I must say, but it was not enough. In 1999, when I was the regional vice chairman, with the support of even the boss man in the house, we had lots and lots of cassava coming from Brazil, Manoa in Brazil. At that time, we asked for help from the PEP government and refused to give us help. But we got help. The stems were distributed according to the needs of the farmers. This was done to counteract the effects of the harsh El Nino season. The people of Region 9, after that, got back into production of cassava. And I want to use the opportunity to thank the people of Manoa in Brazil, who gave us this high-yielding cassava stems free of charge. And they said, I will talk about that another time. And now calling the common government to place some emphasis on the cassava crops in Brazil. Other crops are important, but at this moment, the cassava is most important for food security and the battle against hunger and destitution. Mr. Speaker, we had cases in Guyana where our children have been placed in situations where they had no way of defending themselves. And one of those ways was when a young Indigenous child was raped and sodomized. Mr. Speaker, what we saw was the alleged perpetrator being given state protection and was allowed to walk free. By this episode,
Honorable member,
clearly see
I'll give you a minute to wrap up. You're already a couple of minutes over the 5 minutes.
justice for Indigenous people. And the Madia disaster. What we notice is that at the end of it all, in a nutshell, everybody has got blamed, excepting the government of Guyana. The people who were directly involved were not blamed. The regional executive officer wasn't blamed. The minister of local government wasn't blamed. The minister of education wasn't blamed. The minister of labor wasn't blamed. These were the persons to be blamed for what happened there. Apparently, it was felt that Indigenous lives do not matter. Mr. Speaker, and the compensation given, I would call it jokey compensation. Lives of Indigenous children, or any child, is not $5 million. You're cheapening our lives. That's why at one time I said, take your feet. The people who must take their feet off the necks of the Indigenous people.
I remember with that, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up totally.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now for the Honorable Member, Ms. Yvonne Pearson.